but its total numbers never seem to have exceeded 2,000. The scheme had its attraction for literary men such as Goethe and Herder, and even for the reigning dukes of Gotha and Weimar. Internal rupture preceded its downfall, which was effected by an edict of the Bavarian government in 1785. Later, the title Illuminati was given to the French Martinis, founded in 1754 by Martinus Pasqualis, and to their imitators, the Russian Martinists, headed after 1790 by Professor Schwartz of Moscow. Now, there have been many organizations known as Illuminati, but of course, the Illuminati that was founded by Adam Weishaupt infiltrated the Masonic lodges of Europe, where in large part it just disappeared because now it could remain secret and there'd be no way people could know what was happening. The Illuminati came to the United States in about 1790, and we know that by a speech that was given by Timothy Dwight, who was the grandson of Jonathan Edwards, who was the evangelist who led the first Great Awakening here in the United States. And so the Illuminati then entered the United States. Actually, George Washington actually disowned his Masonic membership because of his concern over the Illuminati and the occult influences that were coming into American Masonry at that time. There are people like Bill Snevelin and Doc Marquis who have been at the higher echelons of these secret movements, because with Masonry, you do not simply have 32 or 33 degrees. As you'll learn very soon, there are other degrees of Masonry, for Masonry is truly a fraternity within a fraternity. Now, here is one of the more important books. It was written by a man who no one would accuse of being a conservative. His name is James H. Billington. He is currently the Librarian of Congress, and his book, Fire in the Minds of Men, is one of the great exposés of the world occult movement. And he talks about the Illuminati. The Order of Illuminists was founded May 1st, 1776, by a professor of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt in Bavaria, Adam Weishaupt and 4 associates. The order was secret and hierarchical, modeled on the Jesuits, and dedicated to Weishaupt's Rousseauian vision of leading all humanity to a new moral perfection, freed from all established religious and political authority. Now, one of the more important things that Billington wrote in his book, Fire in the Minds of Men, and I wanted to bring this to you, he talks about the revolutionary faith was shaped not so much by the critical rationalism of the French Enlightenment, as is generally believed, as by the occultism and proto-romanticism of Germany. This faith was incubated in France during the Revolutionary era within a small subculture of literary intellectuals who were immersed in journalism, fascinated by secret societies, and subsequently infatuated with ideologies as a secular surrogate for religious belief. The flame of faith had begun its migration a century earlier when some European aristocrats transferred their lighted candles from Christian altars to Masonic lodges. The flame of occult alchemists, which had promised to turn dross into gold, reappeared at the center of new circles seeking to recreate a golden age, Bavarian Illuminists conspiring against the Jesuits, French Philadelphians against Napoleon, and Italian charcoal burners against the Habsburgs. There were secret societies all throughout Europe in the 19th century, and of course many of them have carried over into the 20th century, and yet if you talk about secret societies today, immediately you were attacked. Why? Well, because of course they don't want you to know about the secret societies of the last century. Now there are others who will tell you it really wasn't the Illuminati at all. The force behind what's going on in the world today is the Jews. And of course there are many, many people, and it's amazing how many you meet across America as you go on a speaking tour, who honestly believe that the Jews are behind everything going on today. And they can point out a certain number of very interesting things. One of them is the majority of people who surrounded Lenin at the time of the original revolution, the number of people in the original government of the Bolsheviks, predominantly they were almost all Jews. And that's true. And every one of them but one was eventually executed. So you don't want to be part of that sort of a Jewish conspiracy. The thing that I point out, of course, is that the people who surrounded Jesus Christ were all Jews too, but that doesn't make Christianity a Jewish conspiracy. Many socialists and communists have been Jews, but many of the finest conservatives I know happen to be Jewish as well, because God's given them very, very special talents and has a very special place for them in His plan for the world. Now, Those people then who cannot convince you that it is a Jewish conspiracy generally will try to convince you it is a conspiracy of international Jewish bankers. And they can come up with a great deal of evidence for that. And they will point to the financing of the Russian Revolution by Jacob Schiff, who worked for Kuhn Loeb and Company, and it has been reported that he gave $20 million to Kerensky following the revolution, and this obviously means it's a Jewish conspiracy, but you have to understand why Jacob Schiff would have given money to Kerensky and to Lenin. And the reason, of course, is because of the violent anti-Semitism that existed under the Tsar. In 1905, there had been a revolution in Russia. And as immediately after that, there suddenly appeared in Russia a document called the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, and it was circulated widely among the aristocracy, and it basically said the entire world revolutionary movement. And there had already been a number of revolutionary attempts in France and in Germany and in Italy. And it said the revolution throughout the world, specifically the one here, is all a Jewish conspiracy. And this is called the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. And of course, because it was accepted by the Tsar, and they began having an organized effort to destroy the Jewish population, they had something known as pogroms, and they would go in and just destroy Jewish villages and kill everybody there. And this was sanctioned by the government, and it was because of that that Jews throughout the world hated the Tsar and hated what was going on there. But there's other things going on. There's a book written by Henry Ford called The International Jew. Many Jews today will not buy a Ford motor car because of Henry Ford's anti-Semitism, though he's long since gone. But he used the Dearborn Independent to push anti-Semitism. But there are a couple of interesting things about Henry Ford. One is that Henry Ford built up Hitler's military potential, and there were Ford motor plants operating in Germany built before and during the Second World War, providing the war materials for Adolf Hitler. Henry Ford was given the highest award any civilian could be given by the Nazi government. But what most people never stop and think about is that Henry Ford also built the Gorky truck plant and car plant in Russia, in communist Russia. He put Russia on wheels. And during the Vietnam War, I've been told that many of the flyers, seeing the trucks driving down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, carrying the weapons that would be used to kill American boys in South Vietnam, those trucks looked very much like Ford motor trucks. And they looked like Ford motor trucks because they were Ford motor trucks. They were built by the Ford-planted Gorky with technology that had been transferred from America by the Ford company. Then, of course, there are the writings of Winston Churchill. Now, Winston Churchill has always had a good press, or almost always had a good press, and yet during the 1920s in the London Times, he wrote a great deal of anti-Semitic material claiming that the Bolshevik Revolution was entirely a Zionist revolution, pointing to the Jews as being responsible for all the troubles of Europe, troubles that threatened to spread to the West. Winston Churchill, you remember we talked about in our opening remarks. He thought that those lines of Tennyson were the most noble ever written. You remember the Parliament of Man, the Federation of the World. And Winston Churchill, to understand what's going on today is to understand Winston Churchill. Most of you who've probably never studied the history of the First World War don't remember Gallipoli. But Gallipoli was in Asia Minor, and Winston Churchill was the Lord of the Admiralty of Great Britain, and he ordered an attack on Gallipoli. Now, it was a strip of land adjacent to the mountains, and had the British Expeditionary Force ever gotten off the beaches, they never could have done anything because there was nothing behind them but mountains. You could never have gotten through them. And yet, he ordered this. The men were put ashore. 150,000 British soldiers died or were wounded at Gallipoli. 150,000 Turks were wounded at Gallipoli. A senseless slaughter of human life, and many people for some years after the First World War remembered that was Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill had insisted on it, one of the great military disasters of all time. One of the people I really enjoyed meeting in my 37 years I've been involved in researching what's going on was General Albert Wedemeyer. General Wedemeyer was a four-star Marine general. Perhaps some of you remember that wonderful docudrama, Herman Wouk's The Winds of War. How many of you remember that? Basically, it was a story about an American general, played by Robert Mitchum, who was going to the White House to have dinner with Churchill and FDR. That, in real life, was General Albert Wedemeyer. He was the chief planner for the American military, for the American Army, in the years leading up to and at the beginning of the Second World War. And I spent several weekends with him, a great deal of time. And